Hi, everybody. So today I'm going to talk about the language experience approach. The language experience approach, or LEA, is a reading and writing procedure that's based on children's language and experiences. It was created by Roach Van Allen in 1964. The LEA is flexible because it can be done across a variety of educational settings, student groupings, and age ranges, making it one of the most versatile learning strategies that I think exists for students. Each part of the LEA is written on paper, and it's usually done by the whole class. It doesn't have to be all at the same time. It can be done by individual students one at a time, by groupings, or by a whole group setting. The LEA is teacher led, which means the teacher is directing or dictating, but it is student centered. So the students are responsible for giving the information, words, pictures, etc. It creates text that students can actually read because they are the source of information rather from the teacher's sentences or books. So let's go through the steps of the LEA. The steps of the LEA are provide an experience, talk about that experience, record the child's dictation, read the text aloud, make sentence strips, and add word cards to a word bank. There is a lot of things to consider with the LEA. I think one of the greatest struggles with the LEA is the want to correct the students' sentences or spelling when you're creating your large group picture or your sentence strips. This isn't something you should do initially. You should try your best to keep it as authentic and true to what they said, because if you do, then it diminishes, one, their desire to want to participate again, and second, their desire to want to work through learning English. If they make a sentence that isn't quite grammatically correct, that really isn't a big deal, because that's something you can easily fix when you have a conversation about the sentences later that day or the next day. But if you write truly what they said, the students feel like they are taking on the role of the teacher and that they're sharing their ideas and they feel heard. This is especially great procedure for if you have students with disabilities, if you have especially those with learning disabilities who take a while or take a little bit longer to formulate ideas when they're in a group setting, or students that are English language learners who are already struggling to pick up a new language and the pace of a new school. This is a great way for them to introduce their ideas into a group discussion. Like I said, plan that participation. You can have a little one-on-one conversation before you go into a group or before you use the LEA with a student who needs a little bit more planning or who is learning English. And that way they know when they want to say something or what they want to write. And that way they aren't diminished by peers not understanding what they're saying or not being able to clearly dictate their ideas with the rest of the class. This over time will boost their confidence in the ability to share with their friends and share with the class. So let's try it. I'm going to pull up the whiteboard on Zoom. This is something that you can use when you're using a virtual classroom. However, if you're in person, you can use large Post-it notes, which are great because you can tear them off and save them, or you can use a dry erase board because students can then use different colored expo markers and it's erasable. So if you wanted to do multiple experiences throughout the day, you aren't stuck with something that's permanent. So on the whiteboard, I have drawn a box with 2 lines. If I was on Zoom, all people would have access to my LEA and they could draw. And drawing has tons of features on Zoom, which is, I think, great. So they could draw, a sun, people. Forgive my drawing, I am not the best. You could even add text boxes or bubbles to what the people are saying. You could add grass, whatever you want in the picture. And it doesn't have to be a sun with grass. It could be an ocean. It could be something that you're reading. For instance, if I'm planning a unit about kindness, I could read the book called Be Kind, which I've incorporated into my SciOp lesson, or you could use How Full is Your Bucket? If we were to use the How Full is Your Bucket as our experience for our LEA, I could start with my class. It doesn't have to be at the middle to start this conversation. I could start with, it was still morning and Felix's bucket felt almost empty. As he watched his classmates walk into the room, he secretly hoped that they would trip and fall. That's what it feels like when you have an empty bucket. I could then say to my class, what happens to you when you feel down? What makes you have an empty bucket? Then my students could go to a Post-it note, a whiteboard, a Zoom whiteboard even, and they could write sentences. They could tell me sentences. I could dictate the child's words, or they could draw pictures, and then we could have a discussion. The best part about the LEA is facilitating that discussion, recording the child's dictation and reading that text aloud. When the students hear their sentences, they're even more excited because their ideas are being shared with everyone. And then you can talk about why they came up with an answer, like why something gets them down or why something gets them really happy, what's something they can do that's really kind. And then once you have the discussion, you translate everything into sentence strips. These sentence strips can be used after an explicit lesson if you want to break your students off to do like an individual activity, or you can do it right after dictating their sentences. This is really awesome if you're in a special education classroom that you have a co-teacher, that when you are recording their dictation and talking about the text, they can be writing sentence strips so that immediately after you can work together to read those sentence strips aloud. And that provides a little bit of permanence to this lesson where it can have some immediate erasing, like with the whiteboard or with things like that. The best part about the LEA is that you can take word cards from a lesson or the sentences that they created, or if you are trying to introduce specific vocabulary to a lesson, and you can add those to word cards for your students to have in a word bank. I think that word walls in classrooms generally are overlooked, and you put out, vocabulary that you have to. And I think it's even more impactful if students are coming up with words that mean something to them, and then when they create them or when they discover them, that's when they go on the wall. And then they're like, hey, I put that there. I thought of this, I'm really feeling heard in the classroom. This, again, is super impactful for our students who are English language learners and students with disabilities because they are seeing their progress in a visual and big way. I also think it's super impactful that if you have students who are writing in the LEA, that they have a word that's really personal to them, you can add those words to word rings that they can keep in their desks or at their stations. And that when they're doing individual activities, they can pull on that vocabulary that really means something to them. And then you can see over time if you need to progress monitor, like using words that they have developed throughout the year. This is a way to show consistency and growth. So we tried the LEA. This is an example of a blank LEA that you could put in notebooks. You could put on a Promethean board to draw with your class. You could even blow this up on paper and have students draw by hand. I think that's the best method because you can really see a lot of skill with a student in that immediate moment. This is a sample LEA that I have created for the means of a lesson that I am doing. And I hypothetically wrote sentences that students would say. Oftentimes, like I said, students are not going to have perfect spelling. They're not going to have perfect grammar. Do your best to not change that, because you can always go when you make your sentence strips and write them correctly to show that grammar, to show that mechanics, to show correct spelling. And that's when you correct that. You don't want to diminish their work or their effort immediately by not writing exactly what they're saying. Like I said, when you go to make sentence strips, you can correct that spelling. And I think it's awesome that if you highlight the missing letters or words, then the students can see that addition and they can log that into their memory for the next time that you do the LEA in your classroom. It doesn't have to all be perfect on the first go. You can use this activity across a variety of settings, and you can use this throughout the year. And not only can you use it throughout the year, you can use it across multiple grade level bands and abilities. So if you were having students completing a writing portion where they're able to write words, have them write. You can translate this to teacher-led to student-led, where they write sentences when they walk in the door that day. And during your morning meeting, you read the sentences and ask who wrote it, and then you talk about it. You can then, once they have a little bit more confidence in writing, you can correct with them. And that way they see that change is easy and that everybody makes little spelling mistakes from now and then, and how important it is to check our work, to learn how to spell things correctly. And that way the whole group is learning together and not just one student is being singled out for their inability to spell or something. You can use the steps for more difficult knowledge of reading. This doesn't have to be in early elementary school where they're learning how to write or learning how to read. This can be done if you're trying to digest very complex literature. If you're in high school and you're reading Huckleberry Finn, or if you're reading The Scarlet Letter and you want to take a passage and dissect that and have the students write a picture that really extends their knowledge, or if you want to have them look at the sentences and break it down into different things so they can, understand what they're reading on a deeper level, not just skimming through something to get it done or reading it to pass a test. That's not the point of reading for the students, and especially our students who are struggling readers when they get to high school. They need that extra support. Like I said, the LEA for directing student writing samples to teach grammar and mechanics. This is super important throughout the student's life, but especially when they get to high school, they have to be able to express themselves through writing and reading. So if they can use this as a strategy, as a whole group instruction as you go, keep going with it. If it's something that works, keep it. And the LEA can be used for teaching other subjects as well. Like I said, vocabulary is a great way. You can also do it for guiding narrative conversations. If you want to have a fake dialogue between two characters from a book that you're reading in an upper grade level, that way you can have the students pretend to, or not expand on what they're reading, and they can see dialogue on a deeper level. And you can use this to gauge how students are feeling about a lesson. The LEA is so much more than just drawing pictures and writing sentences. This is a super impactful way for your students to learn how to read and write. And it is so impactful because they are the source of information. Thanks, guys.